These are some of the most disturbing crimes that happen in the Spongebob community, and as the video goes on, each case will get significantly worse. On August 16, 2019, the Fall River Police Department in Massachusetts responded to a call that came from the second floor of an apartment building on Peckham Street. The caller said just one thing, that someone was trying to hurt her. The officer arrived at the apartment and found the victim, who they later identified as Zachary Silva, with a laceration and a lump on top of his forehead. Now they tried to call emergency medical services, but Zachary actually declined. He started explaining what happened that night, saying that right before everything went down, someone knocked on his door. When he opened it, two Puerto Rican guys jumped him, hitting him in the head and stealing his diamond-faced gold pullover watch. However, at some point during the interaction with Zachary, the officers noticed that something was out of place in the house. They found pressure cookers, pill presses, a vacuum pump, a vacuum chamber, a container with white powder, and a container with gray powder, all of which are typically used to cook illicit substances. And Zachary in turn became aggressive after realizing what the officers had seen. Now the police then got a search warrant for the apartment and returned on Saturday, August 17th in a joint operation with the Massachusetts State Police Hazardous Materials Unit. And upon getting there, the police knocked on the door, received a response, but no one opened, so they forced their way in. They found all the same drug-making gear, a .25 pistol and 1.9 pounds of MDMA, a popular party drug. Zachary was then immediately arrested. Now during the police interview, however, Zachary's story changed. He mentioned that on the night he called for help, he was in the room with his longtime friend, 22-year-old Luisito Cruz Dubois. At the time, someone knocked on the door. He peeped through the keyhole and saw a person wearing a hood. As he opened the door slightly, Zachary was then grabbed from behind by Luisito, while the hooded figure kicked it open. He was then struck in the head with a pistol and stabbed with a hypodermic needle. He struggled and managed to pull off the hood, and saw that it was Luisito's brother, Terrell Cruz Dubois. It's not clear what happened afterwards, but once the interview was over, the police obtained a search warrant to search for the firearm and the clothes in Luisito's and Terrell's home at 603 Slade Street, and when they got there, they met and arrested Terrell, who was wearing Zachary's gold pullover watch. But Luisito wasn't home. Now Terrell was then charged with firearm and masked robbery, home invasion, assault and battery, and possession of ammunition. But as for Luisito, he was added to the list of most wanted fugitives. Then on August 27th, Detective Derek Beaulieu of the Major Crimes Division received a tip about his whereabouts, and acting on the information, they went to his home on Rosalita Street and found Luisito hiding under a bed. He was then placed under arrest, and at which point he was found in possession of 1.9 ounces of MDMA in the shape of characters from the SpongeBob Squarepants series, such as Patrick Star and Squidward tentacles. The shape of the pills made the officers worry about the safety of kids, who could mistake them for candy. With Halloween approaching and kids about to go trick-or-treating, they knew that these illegal drugs could accidentally or intentionally be distributed to kids by bad actors. So on August 28th, the Fall River Police Department issued a widespread warning against SpongeBob-looking MDMA drugs.
Police say they found this MDMA, also known as ecstasy, while arresting a suspect. As you can tell, the drugs are shaped like SpongeBob characters. Officers are asking parents and teachers to be on the lookout for these as school starts and to call police if they see anything suspicious.
Luisito was then charged with firearm and masked robbery, home invasion, assault and battery, possession of drugs, as well as possession with intent to distribute. However, it would seem like this wasn't the end of SpongeBob's involvement with narcotics, since 4 years later, a similar SpongeBob-inspired substance packaging turned up across the Atlantic. A few days before January 2023, police in Gafford, Leeds had flagged a vehicle they suspected was connected to a local drug operation, though they didn't publicly disclose how they got this information. So on January 3rd, 2023, the officers stationed themselves by the A1 motorway near Garforth, West Yorkshire, one of Britain's major highway routes.
On January 23rd, 2023, police in Garforth, Leeds stopped a car which they suspected to be operated by a dealer of illegal substances.
As soon as the car pulled over, the search began, and it didn't take long for the officers to find stacks of cash hidden in a secret compartment in the back seat. But when they questioned the driver about it, who I'll be calling Matt, he couldn't explain where it came from, and because he had no legitimate story for the money, they arrested him on the spot, suspecting the cash came from dealing drugs. And with Matt now in custody, investigators took over and worked to uncover any addresses or properties connected to the local drug operation, and every lead pointed to the same house, a house located in Moorside Road, Dricklington, Leeds. The authorities moved swiftly to search the house, and once they arrived at the property, they met a man I'll call Flynn, who led them into the house and stood back as they searched the place. And in the course of the search, they found even more money stacked away. But there was one discovery that truly stood out. The officers found a large amount of cannabis wrapped in bundles bearing stickers of SpongeBob Squarepants characters, and so Flynn was then placed under arrest as well. and by the following day, on January 4th, 2023, the Yorkshire Post reported the bust to the public, detailing the unusual discovery. However, both Flynn and Matt were released while the public continued gathering evidence against them. The Spongebob branding in Leeds was on the drugs. In the next case, however, it was on the suspect, and his neighbors paid the price for it.
We kept getting reports of kind of the same MO where the door was kicked in and this stuff is taken is very similar, TVs, electronics, and stuff like that.
It was July 2022 on Jackson Avenue in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and residents of Waterside Apartments had just left their homes for work. What they didn't know was that someone had been watching their movements though, and by the time they got home, 5 of them found their front doors broken and their homes robbed. Many residents reported losing high-value items, including electronics such as televisions, iPads, and internet routers, as well as firearms, ammunition, and other valuables. They immediately reported the break-ins to the police, but while the investigation was still ongoing and officers were trying to determine who was behind the incidents, it happened again. Throughout August, 3 more burglaries occurred, all with the same pattern.
We kept getting reports of kind of the same MO where the door was kicked in and this stuff is taken is very similar, TVs, electronics, and stuff like that.
Now, due to these patterns, there was no doubt that these burglaries were all connected and done by the same person or group. However, what the burglar didn't know was that not everyone was away during the time these crimes were committed. Following the multiple incidents in August, at least 2 neighbors reported seeing the burglar run from the building immediately after the break-ins, describing him as wearing brightly colored Spongebob Squarepants shorts with matching socks. Then on September 13th, 2022, the apartment complex faced yet another burglary, bringing the total to 5 in 2 months. At this point, the Spongebob burglar had become a household name in the apartment complex, but the authorities would soon get a major breakthrough in the search for the burglar. The same day, the police arrested Eva Lewis, a woman who also lived in the Waterside apartment complex, for child endangerment and 1 count of concealing stolen property. Now, the stolen property was one of the items taken during the burglaries, raising the possibility that the burglar might also be a resident of the apartment. And so after these incidents, on September 14th, 2022, the Tulsa Police Department's burglary detectives decided to search through Facebook Marketplace for stolen items, specifically high-end TVs, iPads, and other items that matched the descriptions in the burglary reports. And they eventually discovered something interesting. An account was listing items that matched the serial numbers of stolen goods, and when they looked at the listing photos, something in the background caught their eye. A set of Spongebob shorts and socks, matching what the victims and other eyewitnesses described seeing the suspect wear during those burglaries. And the account that listed the products was named Smackman, which turned out to be Edward Price's Facebook username. Their neighbor, Edward Price, had a serious criminal history, having previously been arrested in connection with burglaries. However, he would often get away with his crimes, as during his trials, the victims never appeared in court to identify Edward or even testify, so the prosecutor would simply have no case against them and the charges would eventually be dropped. But it wasn't just a Facebook account that implicated Edward, as one of the victims would also provide the video footage showing the aftermath of one of the break-ins, where Edward could be seen with an accomplice. So once the police received this footage, they released it to the public to help identify the other man. And while all of that was going on, they also obtained a search warrant for Edward's apartment at the Waterside complex. And 2 days after making the discovery on Facebook Marketplace, the Tulsa Police Department's detectives arrived at Edward's apartment and recovered items including multiple high-end televisions, cell phones, iPads, tablets, internet routers, firearms, live ammunition, and other electronic devices, all of which matched the valuables that residents of the Waterside apartments reported as stolen. However, there was one thing left to connect Edward to all the multiple burglaries beyond a reasonable doubt: the Spongebob shorts and socks. As they searched the apartment, one of the officers heard the hum of a running dryer. They decided to check it out, and when they opened the dryer, they found the exact Spongebob Squarepants shorts and socks that the victims described, and that had been seen in the Facebook Marketplace photos. And so Edward Price was then placed under arrest, taken into custody, and was then charged with 3 counts of second-degree burglary after a felony conviction, knowingly concealing stolen property and possession of firearms in the commission of a felony. And in the days that followed the arrest, most of the stolen items were successfully returned to the residents of their Waterside apartments. Then on September 20th, 2022, the TPD announced Edward's arrest on their Facebook page with the caption, "FYI, the subject's apartment was not located in a pineapple under the sea," referencing Spongebob Squarepants' fictional home. The story immediately went viral on social media and several local and national news outlets, though until now there's no public record about Edward's or Eva's conviction. But while Edward was caught because of his cartoon printed outfit, the suspect in the next case actually has a real-life connection with SpongeBob.
I'm done with my shift, Mr. Krabs. And let me just say, there will come a day when I will make something of my life, and I will never have to set foot in this grease trap again.
Roger Bumpass, the actor behind the Squidward Tentacles character in the show SpongeBob SquarePants, is regarded as one of the most established figures in the voice acting world, with hundreds of animation and television credits under his belt. His role as Squidward, a character he's played since 1999, was his most critically acclaimed. He has also voiced characters in popular shows like Tiny Toon Adventures, Batman the Animated Series, and Rugrats. However, his spotless reputation and impressive career were almost destroyed by a single incident. One evening on January 15, 2016, he decided to go for a drink in a bar in Burbank, California. It was supposed to be just another night out, but by around 11 PM, he realized that he'd had far more than enough for the night. So he got into his blue PT Cruiser and began driving home through a residential area of Burbank. Now soon after, the Burbank Police Department received a report of a vehicle that stopped in the middle of the roadway on the 400 block of South Fairview Street. The patrol officers in the area arrived on the scene between 10:45 and 10:55 to check it out, and upon their arrival, they found Roger's blue PT Cruiser right in the center of the street, with Roger outside his car, clearly drunk. Now when they reached him, he struggled to keep his balance and had to lean on his car for support. The officers then administered a field sobriety test, which Roger of course couldn't complete successfully. So he was arrested on suspicion of driving under the influence of alcohol and taken to the Burbank Police Department for booking later that night. Now upon getting to the station, the officers administered a breathalyzer test. In California, the legal limit is 0.08%, but Roger's blood alcohol concentration measured approximately 0.14%, nearly twice the limit. So the following day, he was formally booked into the Burbank City Jail on a misdemeanor DUI charge, and the bail was set at $15,000. Now on January 16, 2016, around 7:30 AM, Roger posted bond and was released from custody with a citation. However, he was due back in court the following month. Now nothing leaked for a few days, until January 19, 2016, when TMZ broke the story. Major news outlets including ABC7 and CBS then picked up the story within hours of TMZ's report, and Burbank police spokesman Sergeant Claudio Losaco confirmed the arrest to the media. Squidward Tentacles was a short-tempered, impatient, and bitter character who also despised his two neighbors, SpongeBob and Patrick. So media coverage actually particularly linked Squidward's usually irritated character to the actor's real-life DUI arrest. And as soon as the arrest photo of Roger circulated online, it was commonly paired with memes and jokes referencing Squidward's personality. Some said that he was tired of Bikini Bottom, while others joked about his frustration at his two neighbors pushing him to the brink. Now, public reaction on social media was mixed with disappointment and dark humor, with many users joking that Squidward had finally had enough. After all, Roger himself did say that the reason Squidward was fun to voice was because of his sarcasm and his frustration. However, Roger's account of what happened that night differed from the officer's claims. When interviewed later, Roger actually claimed that he wasn't leaning against his car and that the police found him because they were tailing him and not because they received a report. He also claimed that his car was not parked in the middle of the street. Instead, the cops pulled him over to ask him if he'd been drinking, which he then confirmed. Now, following the public reports, TMZ contacted Nickelodeon representatives to ask whether Roger would be fired for his DUI arrest due to the morality clause in his contract. Like most entertainment contracts, a morality clause allows a network to fire someone if their behavior becomes a liability or is deemed immoral or unethical. So with his career hanging in the balance, Roger released a public statement on January 21st to address the situation. To all my dear friends, perhaps you've heard now, I was arrested on DUI charges recently. This is the lowest point in my entire life. No words can describe the remorse, grief, and shame that I'm going through. I don't know what Nickelodeon will do, but I'm prepared for this to be the end of my career. The way God does things is to give us freedom to go down bad paths, but if we don't change, He gives us over to the consequences of our actions. I firmly believe that this is the case here. Please pray for me and the outcome of my actions. I need God more than ever. I am so ashamed. Thank you for your kind words for me. And finally, on January 25th, 2016, TMZ released a report on Nickelodeon's highly anticipated decision, confirming that the company had no plans to terminate Roger's contract and that he would continue voicing Squidward. It turned out that the network did not consider the arrest a violation of the morality clause, and since there was no evidence that there were any accidents, injuries, or property damage during the incident, Roger remained the voice of Squidward Tentacles. For Roger, the 2016 arrest ended up being not a big deal to his professional career, but in this next case, the victim lost pretty much everything.
Hello?
The DC streetball community had grown to become a high-level competitive area with an intense basketball culture. In this community, Andrew Washington built a solid life for himself. He was born and raised in the city where he lived with his hardworking single mother. As a teen, he was famous for his ultra-defensive and physical style of play.
He was just a physical guy. I mean, he could really score, really talented, really athletic. And you knew if he was out there, he's a trash talker. And you knew if he was out there, it's going to be a really long night.
From 2004 to 2006, Andrew competed for the University of Delaware, playing in many different tournaments both locally and overseas, and he continued to earn his place as a legend in the DC streetball ecosystem, a fast-paced version of basketball, typically played outdoors and with less formal structure and rules. He appeared in high-profile summer and playground leagues, including the Goodman League, one of DC's most prestigious summer basketball leagues. Now he won the $10,000 Fight Ball 02, a one-on-one basketball competition qualifier tournament in New York City against 8 other competitors, and he would even go on to win a highly competitive final against Leandro de Lima, with the scoreline finishing 6-5. His win qualified him to play in the $100,000 Fight Ball 03 NYC Final Championship in March 2016. And from then on, Andrew built a reputation in the streetball community, especially in the Goodman League at Berry Farms, and was widely regarded as a living legend. Now in his early 20s, because of his distinctly recognizable pointy chin, Miles Rawls, the Goodman League's commissioner, gave him the nickname Needle Chin. However, that name didn't do justice to Andrew's appearance, so Miles started to call him Spongebob instead, and from then on, the nickname stuck, becoming part of his identity and spreading far beyond DC. In 2021, he was even introduced as SpongeBob when he got a chance at being drafted into the Big Three, a 3 versus 3 basketball league. And by 2024, he was already a popular figure in the Washington DC streetball community. Now on Friday, February 9th, 2024, Andrew celebrated his 40th birthday with some of his friends, including his longtime friend, Estep Kyler Jr., a 36-year-old resident of Largo, Maryland. Now early in the morning, Andrew and Estep were sitting in a parked car in the 2400 block of Iverson Street in Temple Hills, when a verbal argument suddenly turned violent. Now while no one knew exactly what was said, the fight quickly escalated from words to a brutal physical struggle. And so at approximately 4:05 AM, Prince George's County Police received a call about a shooting on Iverson Street, and when the officers arrived at the scene and was searching the area, they found Estep outside of the 2300 block of Iverson Street. He was in pain, and upon close examination, he appeared to have been shot. And when officers asked what happened, he claimed that he'd only been in a fight with his friend in a parking lot. But when they checked the place, they found Andrew dead from multiple gunshot wounds. Estep was taken to the hospital to receive treatment for his wounds, and the police then began investigations. And those showed that Estep shot Andrew during the altercation, and the police believed that he then shot himself since his injuries were non-life-threatening. They also obtained footage of Estep with a swollen eye, knocking on a door and asking a man to help him and call the police.
Hello? Yeah. Can you please help me, man? What's up? Can you call 911 or police, please, man?
And in the footage, it is unclear whether he'd already shot himself. The police arrested Estep while he was still in the hospital, charging him with first-degree and second-degree murder. They plan to move him straight to the Department of Corrections as soon as the doctors cleared him. Now, Estep Kyler's case has not yet reached a conclusion, as there has been no public report of a court ruling. But while Andrew wore his SpongeBob tag proudly, the name had a more violent reaction in the next story. Robert Sidney Lee was 39 years old, from Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, known among friends and acquaintances to have anger issues. Jamal Francis Britton, on the other hand, a 42-year-old from the same neighborhood, was one of those friends who knew about Robert's temperament. Now, Robert and Jamal moved in the same social circles around Lewisburg and Sealton, often meeting up at a friend's apartment to drink and hang out. Saturday, July 16, 2016 was no different. Jamal and Robert, along with their social group, were at Keisha Jacobs' apartment in Century Village in Buffalo Township. Keisha was the mother of Jamal's son, and the group socialized into the early morning hours of July 17. But as everybody got drunk, the atmosphere grew tense, and soon Jamal became annoying, according to the witnesses present, although the exact things he did were never mentioned. And when others could no longer take his behavior, he was asked to leave. In the ensuing argument, Robert insulted him, saying he looked like SpongeBob SquarePants. And that comparison hit a nerve, and Jamal snapped, repeatedly demanding why Robert had called him that. But Robert told him to leave him alone and continued to insult him, and this made Jamal exit the house angrily. Around 5 AM, Robert was smoking at the rear of the apartment complex when Jamal returned, now wearing a black hooded sweatshirt. He asked to speak with Keisha, who thought everybody had left, and told him to meet him outside, so as not to wake the baby. But unknown to her, Robert was also there. When Robert saw Jamal approaching with his hands in his pocket, his alarms were immediately triggered. He thought Jamal was armed with a firearm and with hostile intent had come to shoot him. Robert asked if he wanted to fight. Jamal set down the bag he was carrying, put his hands up and smiled, and Robert in turn took this as a yes. They engaged in another argument, but this quickly escalated into a physical confrontation, and at that moment, Robert pulled out a pocket knife and drove it into Jamal's left side, cutting through a major blood vessel. With his life hanging by a thread, Jamal looked at Robert and said, "You stabbed me." And Robert's response simply was, "So what? What are you going to do? Call the police?" Now standing a few feet away was Keisha, who saw everything. She turned and went back to the apartment, where she would then call 911 to report the incident, before Robert then walked in a few minutes later and said to Keisha, "You'd better go check on your boy. I just knocked him out." Robert walked out right after saying that and drove away from Century Village, stopping at the Susquehanna River in Northumberland to discard the knife. And while all of this was going on though, Jamal, who was severely wounded, somehow got to his feet and walked away from the spot. But after reaching a nearby playground, he collapsed to the ground and stopped moving. Now the first responders would arrive just as Robert was driving away to find Jamal lying on the ground at the playground. One of the paramedics who noticed Robert's car leaving the crime scene took note of the license number, which he later provided to the police. Now Jamal was rushed to the Evangelical Community Hospital in Lewisburg, where the medical team, in an attempt to save his life, had to revive him twice. And after confirming that Jamal was stable enough for transport, they moved him to Geisinger Medical Center in Danville, where he was expected to receive more advanced treatment. However, at 8:28 a.m. on the same day, despite the effort of the medical team at Danville, Jamal succumbed to his injuries and was pronounced dead at the Geisinger Medical Center. His cause of death was ruled as internal bleeding from the deep stab wound. Then, a few hours later, following Keisha's statement and the paramedics' provision of Robert's plate number, the police tracked Robert to his home in Point Township and placed him under arrest, charging him with a criminal homicide. Robert later confessed to the police in a video-recorded statement to killing Jamal in self-defense and throwing the knife into the river. He was then transported to the Union County Prison, where he was held without bail while awaiting trial. Now, in the investigation that followed, the police obtained security footage and witness testimony from Keisha, but couldn't actually recover the knife used to pierce Jamal. Now, District Attorney D. Peter Johnson was assigned the case, while Robert was assigned Public Defender Brian Ulmer to represent him. And after examining the facts of the case, the DA offered Robert a plea deal, asking him to plead guilty to involuntary manslaughter and serve 5 to 20 years in prison. But Robert rejected this deal, choosing to go to trial instead. His argument was that he acted in self-defense, since he had interpreted Jamal's appearance as threatening to his life. But about a year later, Robert was found guilty of homicide and tampering with evidence, since he disposed of the knife. He was then sentenced to 18 years and 9 months in state prison for the homicide charge, in addition to a concurrent sentence of 9 months to 2 years for tampering with evidence. However, he was credited with having already served 1 year and 15 days while awaiting trial. Even today, Robert insists he acted in self-defense. However, the only thing the victim in our next story did was sit on the couch and watch cartoons.
He doesn't say anything else to me. I'm like, Armani, you okay, Armani? He doesn't say anything. He doesn't respond to me.
Armani Clark had just moved to Las Vegas from Reno, Nevada after his mother, Justine Tate, accepted a new job there. Armani was highly athletic and dreamed of becoming a football star. At a young age, he was already his younger siblings' protector on the street, especially his younger brother. Armani and his family moved to an apartment at Town and Country Manor Apartments in southeast Las Vegas, but their lives would soon get entangled with that of a dangerous man named Eleazar Quintero. 41-year-old Eleazar was a career criminal who'd just been busted for over 500 fentanyl pills only weeks before Armani's family moved to Las Vegas. Because his record banned him from owning weapons, he was quickly arrested again for having a gun and scheduled for sentencing on March 8, 2023. Around this time, Eleazar was living next door to Armani's family, not as a legal tenant, but crashing in an apartment he was subletting from a friend, we'll call him Manny. On Tuesday, March 7, 2023, Eleazar was spending time with his friends in his apartment. At some point in the early evening, he got up and retrieved a rifle from his bedroom, shouldered it, and put it towards the south wall. What he didn't know was that on the other side of the south wall, Armani was sitting quietly on the couch with his younger brother, Honor, watching an episode of Spongebob Squarepants on television. And right before 6 p.m., Eleazar delivered a famous line by Al Pacino's character, Tony Montana, from the 1983 film Scarface, saying, "Say hello to my little friend," and then fired indiscriminately at the south wall of his apartment. Now, Eleazar appeared to be in shock the moment the firearm went off. According to one of his friends, his reaction suggested that he may not have intended to fire it, but the weapon already went off, and it ripped through the apartment wall that separated Eleazar's unit from the Tate family's apartment, and it struck Armani in the head, then shattered, sending fragments into Honor's leg. In another room, Justine was catching up with other family members, and the moment they heard the sound of the gunshot, they immediately rushed out of the room and ran into the living room to check on the boys, and when they entered the room, they were greeted by chaos. Honor cried out softly and twisted his leg because it hurt so much, and when they turned towards Armani, there was only cold and silence.
My baby got shot in his head.
Meanwhile, in the other room, Eliazar's friends became agitated as they heard screaming from their neighbor's apartment. They immediately knew that the bullet had hit someone, and engulfed with fear, Eliazar began to pack the rifle into a long black cloth bag. Shortly afterward, one of Armani's parents saw what they described as a heavy-set Hispanic male going out of the neighbor's room. He apparently even asked if the discharged bullet had hit someone, and when they confirmed, he immediately bolted from the scene, taking multiple firearms with him as he escaped. Now, first responders later arrived at the scene, and both Armani and Honor were transported to Sunrise Hospital and Medical Center for emergency treatment. The medical personnel tried all they could to resuscitate Armani, but despite their efforts, the doctor pronounced him dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. On the other hand, Honor's injury was ruled as non-life-threatening, so he received treatment for his leg. Now, around 30 minutes after the shooting, Eliazar made a frantic call to Manny, saying,
"Something went down. Something bad went down at the apartment."
He then called another friend saying,
"I'm in trouble. I need a place to hide."
His friend agreed to come over, and not long afterward, Eliazar arrived at the apartment with multiple firearms. And when asked where all the guns came from, Eliazar told him that he tried to sell a firearm to someone inside his apartment and accidentally shot someone. And while Eliazar was still hiding, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department officers began their investigation, obtaining surveillance footage from the apartment complex that captured a man matching Eliazar's description getting into a car, then driving away from the complex. They also went into Justine's apartment, found a bullet hole in the wall, and conducted a welfare check on Eliazar's apartment, and also found a single corresponding bullet hole on the opposite side. And while searching through the apartment, they found Eliazar's debit card, confirming that he was there. Now, the following day, Eliazar failed to appear in court for scheduled sentencing, so the judge issued a warrant for his arrest. And soon after, the police managed to locate Eliazar and took him into custody for failing to appear in court. He received 2 to 5 years in prison for the previous drug and gun charges, and was taken to the Nevada Department of Corrections to serve his time, while the investigation for the shooting was still ongoing. Now, during the investigation, a GoFundMe fundraiser was set on March 8, 2023 to help cover the funeral expenses and to support Honor. On the GoFundMe page, Justine wrote,
"Never in a million years would I think I'd have to bury my beautiful son. He was great, and if you knew my son, then you knew a smile would brighten up the darkest house. My children didn't deserve any of this."
The target was set at $50,000, and within a few days of the GoFundMe page going live, almost $20,000 had already been raised. Then on Friday, March 10th, 2023, Justine spoke to Fox 5 Vegas about the tragedy. Visibly distressed, she described the horror of watching her son bleed out right in front of their TV, adding,
"If I could have taken that bullet from them, I would have. I would rather them live without a mommy than to lose their life."
And when asked about how Honor is coping with the situation and what he just experienced, she said,
"It's so traumatized, he doesn't want to leave the house. But yesterday when I went to clean his wounds, he immediately was like, Mama, I want our money."
On Tuesday, March 14, 2023, multiple news outlets began reporting on the case, with the story spreading nationally due to the tragic and unique circumstances of Armani getting shot while watching SpongeBob SquarePants with his brother. And with the story going national, Clark County Sheriff Kevin McMahill held a press conference to address the case, confirming that the police identified and arrested Eliazar Quintero due to his previous drug and gun charges. The sheriff added,
"He's out there showing off with a gun, and then pulls the trigger on the gun, killing one of the victims and hospitalizing another. We had done a long-time narcotic investigation on him."
He concluded that the investigation was ongoing to confirm what the man was doing with the rifle and to find evidence to formally charge him with murder rather than a lesser charge. And a few months later, on Wednesday, October 11th, 2023, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department homicide detectives officially identified the 41-year-old as the shooting suspect. This meant that in addition to his current drug and gun conviction, he would now face an additional homicide charge. In July 2025, more than 2 years after the incident, Eliazar pleaded guilty to 3 felony counts: involuntary manslaughter, reckless endangerment, and other charges. And so after a lengthy trial, he was sentenced to 6 to 15 years in state prison, which is the maximum possible penalty for an involuntary manslaughter conviction. He would be eligible for parole after serving 6 years, and he was also ordered to serve the sentences consecutively, meaning they would begin only after he'd completed his current sentence for his prior charges. Eliazar was taken back to Southern Desert Correctional Center, where he was already serving time on prior convictions. Justine left the courthouse still weeping, while the mother in our last story blacked out at the worst possible moment of her life.
"I don't believe Justine could ever do something like that, because she would always teach Sutton that she is kind, she is beautiful, and she is loved."
At the house on Cedar Lake Road, Blake realized that he hadn't seen his big sister Justine or her daughter Sutton in hours. His older brother, Neasley, had just asked where they were, so Blake went back to the property to look for them. And in the shadows, he spotted a blue plastic bin and some black trash bags, and as he got closer, his heart dropped. A human foot was sticking out of one of the bags. He panicked and ran back to find Neasley, but his brother didn't believe him at first. When Neasley finally followed him back and saw the terrifying scene for himself, the reality set in, and they immediately called 911. The year was 2012, and Justine had just been diagnosed with multiple mental health disorders, including bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, ADHD, general anxiety, and depression. Over the next decade, managing those conditions would take over her life, and in her struggles, she turned to drugs, developing an addiction to heroin and methamphetamines, which only made her mental health worse. Now by 2017, Justine was a single mother to her daughter, Sutton Marie Moser. Left to raise Sutton alone after her father's departure, Justine now faced the burden of managing her declining mental health while taking care of her child. Now before Sutton was born, Justine was on prescribed medication to manage her conditions, but in 2020 she decided to not take her medications anymore, and by September 2021 she'd gone 1 year without them. Now despite having her own apartment in Oscoda Township, Justine and Sutton spent most of her time at the Cedar Lake Road home to be near family, and there Justine's mother, Elisa, acted as the child's primary caregiver, constantly urging Justine to stay so that she and her two brothers could take care of her daughter. She actually agreed, and by September, Justine and Sutton had been staying in the lake house for about a month and a half. However, Justine's heavy use of heroin and methamphetamines had started to tell on her. She experienced severe withdrawal symptoms and went approximately 2 weeks without sleeping, and that was when the hallucinations began. Justine's grip on reality fractured, and she would often get confused about where she was and where she wanted to be. For example, she once fell asleep in a nearby graveyard in Oscoda. Then, on September 16, 2021, 2 days after Sutton's birthday, Justine's brother, Blake, woke up to find Justine in the bathroom doing lines of substances. He looked around and couldn't find Sutton, so he asked Justine about her whereabouts, but she just snapped at him saying,
"Mind your own business."
He was used to her talking like that, so he left her alone. At around 2:30 PM, Neasley left the house to go to work. Before he left, he saw Justine and Sutton, and they were both fine. A short while later, Blake saw Justine leave the house to meet a pink car that had stopped at a store across the street, and after spending a few minutes around the car, she returned home, but then left again. Now Blake went out to the beach, and a while later, Justine returned to the house in the evening. She was in the living room with Sutton, watching SpongeBob SquarePants. It was at this moment that Justine went into another one of her command hallucinations, where she heard voices in her head that instructed her to do something. According to Justine, SpongeBob spoke directly from the TV screen. His voice told her
they were going to kill her.
Then the cartoon character threatened her life. But there was one way to avoid the catastrophe. SpongeBob told her,
"Kill your daughter or face your own death."
And this was when the psychosis completely took over. Justine was afraid for her life and felt the only way to live was to carry out the instruction. So, driven by terror and drug-induced psychosis, she went to the kitchen and grabbed a knife. She went back to the living room and attacked Sutton. And after carrying out the crime, Justine blacked out. And when she came back to her senses, she didn't remember what happened. All she saw was that she was standing with a knife over Sutton's lifeless body. And in a state of panic, she wrapped Sutton's body in bedding and then placed her inside a garbage bag. She also took off her blood-stained jeans and black sweatshirt and then threw them inside the trash bag. Afterwards, she placed the bag inside a blue plastic tote and moved it to the back of the Cedar Lake apartment, near a sliding door in the balcony area. She then left the house immediately. At around 10 PM, Blake returned home and found the house empty. However, he had no reason to think Sutton was missing since it was late. In the early morning hours the following day, Justine went to her apartment in downtown Oscoda and attempted to leave this earth on her own. But even after doing stuff, she somehow managed to survive the attempt. So she had left and began to walk back to her mother's house. Now when Neasley returned from work around 3:30 AM on September 17, only Blake was at home. And after realizing neither of them had seen Sutton or Justine for hours, Blake went to the back of the house to look for them. And that was when he found the body. They called 911 immediately, and officers from Oscoda Township Police Department were dispatched to the residence. Officer Gerald Sobolewski arrived at the scene and asked the brothers to direct him to the place where they'd found the foot. And after seeing what they found, he called in emergency medical services to the scene. The officers opened the garage bags and found Sutton's body wrapped in bedding inside. The Michigan State Police Forensics team arrived on the scene, and together with the Oscoda Township Police Department began processing it. Shane Hill and his team from the State Police Crime Lab took over the scene to look for evidence, and inside the trash bags, they found a pair of blood-stained jeans and a black sweatshirt. They also managed to pull 13 different fingerprints off the bags, and every single one of them was a match for Justine. And while the crime scene was being processed, the police began searching for for Justine as well, and during their search, they collected security footage showing Justine near her house in Oscoda earlier that morning, and so officers were dispatched to Justine's house, but they actually didn't meet her there. About 4.5 hours later, at approximately 8:30 am, the police located her walking along railroad tracks near Vaughan Trail in Oscoda Township, and when the officers approached her, she was covered in blood and looked completely detached mentally. Even when they told her about her daughter's demise, she didn't react. Now, the police detained her and took her to the Oscoda Township Police Department station for questioning, and during the initial questioning, she refused to answer any questions. Well, later on, after the crime scene investigation was complete and sufficient evidence had been gathered, the police obtained an arrest warrant, and so she was formally arrested and charged with 1 count of felony murder and 1 count of first-degree abuse. Both sentences carried the potential for life imprisonment. Now, Justine was booked into county jail at 4:08 p.m. the same day. The officers notified Michigan Child Protective Services, which opened its own investigation into the case. Now, speaking to the media, Martin Gajewski, the owner of a laundromat across the street from Justine's apartment and the person who provided the security footage that placed Justine's movements around her apartment, expressed his shock at what happened.
I've been here a long time, and this is the first time I heard something like this since the 70s. She was a customer here. I knew who she was. It shocked me because she didn't seem to be that kind of person. It is unusual to have something like this in a town like this. This is a close-knit community.
Now, Justine's mother, Elisa, on the other hand, didn't believe her daughter committed the crime.
I don't believe Justine could ever do something like that, because she would always teach Sutton that she is kind, she is beautiful, and she is loved. I will be there for Justine no matter what anybody calls me. That is my child, and nobody understands that.
But on Monday, September 20th, 2021, Justine appeared for her arraignment at the 81st District Court. Now, she pleaded not guilty to first-degree felony murder and first-degree abuse, and was scheduled to appear before a judge for a probable cause hearing to determine whether her case should go to trial. On October 1st, 2021, Ryan concluded an interview with Justine, where she informed the CPS investigator about experiencing hallucinations during her withdrawal. She informed him that while watching TV, the SpongeBob character instructed her to carry out the crime, or she would pay with her own life. She then told him that that was all she remembered, as she blacked out immediately afterwards. Then Justine would later plead guilty to all the charges, and by the time the trial was over, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on the first-degree felony charge. And for the first-degree abuse charge, she was sentenced to a maximum of 50 years in prison, with the 2 charges both running at the same time.